I almost didn't have a choice. My mother was pregnant with me and sailing with my dad and on Bob Johnstone's schooner Heather. And there's a picture of me at about 10 months old, sitting in Bob Johnstone's lap with two hands on the spokes of the wheel steering at 10 months. And my baby album says that the first word I learned to say was boat, and the first steps I took was on the grass at Monroe Street trying to get back aboard Heather. So I almost didn't have a choice. But by the time I was about 8, I was put to work sanding the oars for our dinghy in the our boat Ardell that my father owned at that point. And so that was how I got into the work of sailing as well as the pleasure of sailing. By the time I was 13, I was regular crew on Ardell, and at 14 in 1955, I became a junior member. And then at 1971, at age 30, I became a regular member, because in those days the transition from junior to associate to regular was at age 30, as opposed to today it's 35, I believe. So it got me a head start in getting to the old guard. In addition to crewing on Ardell, which we did all the time, I did Layman Dinghy Frostbite series in the spring and fall. In those days we'd have usually 7 weekends, spring and fall, and we'd do 5 races each day. So you'd get 35 races in spring and 35 in fall. And then on Ardell, when you did the summer series and the port-to-port and the championship, another 30. So I was sailing 100 races a year of one sort or another. And along the way, particularly on port-to-port races and things like that, I would skipper Ardell, my father not be aboard. And when we came down to the winner's dinner in the fall, there were the trophies. Waukegan race first, H.T. Van Mell. I said, Dad, I skippered that race. And he said, son, when you pay the bills, you get your name on the trophy. And so in 1971, we drew up a contract, and I chartered Ardell from my father, and I paid $1,800 and went out and won the season championship and got my name on the trophy. So in 1972, Dad sold Ardell and bought the CNC 39 Volare. We had the winning Ardell crew, so we stepped aboard that and campaigned that from 72 through 77. Now this was the first time that my father owned a boat that we could actually race the Mackinac. So in those years, we started racing the Mackinac in our own boats. I'd started when I was about 16, sailing Nancy Sindelar's father's boat, Reverie, was my first Mackinac. And by the time, when we sold Ardell in 77, by that time I'd completed 25 Mackinacs and was part of the old goats. I went on eventually to do 30 of those. Then in 78, I bought an Islander 36, which I named Vanishing Animal, and sailed that here regularly and the Mackinacs up through 1985. Then I married Sandy and moved to San Francisco, but I took Vanishing Animal with me, and we're still sailing her on San Francisco Bay today. I didn't even try to start writing them all down. There are just too many. Well, the highlights, there's so many of them. Yes, Mackinac races were great. I will have one that I hadn't made a note of before. One of the last races, when I'd come back from California, I was sailing on Impulse, and part of the crew was Janet Baxter. And so we were going through the Manitou Passage, the normal thing, you got thunder and lightning coming in from the northwest. We're going up the Manitou Passage. Behind us are all of the boats that are still trying to get up and come in. You see all the green lights. And I had Janet sitting on the cabin top. I said, when you see red lights, let us know. Because what that meant was the front had hit them. everybody had to bear off to take off their spinnakers, and that gave us about a half a mile of warning before it came. Meanwhile, we'd all gotten our foul weather gear on, we'd bent on the number 3 jib. As soon as she says green light, we tripped the spinnaker, dropped it, hoisted the number 3, and when it hit, we were just off and running. I served on over 20 committees for the yacht club over 20, almost 40 years, and that was just wonderful. And one of the favorite ones was the Timmy Angston Regatta, which was the 18 top college racing teams in the country sailed right here in Belmont Harbor over Thanksgiving weekend. And we'd do a double round robin and get in 36 races. And there were times it was snowing and ice and things like that.
It's like Michigan.
But it was really fun, and I'd spent, I grew up as running a crash boat for that, and eventually I was the chairman for 6 or 8 years along the way. And that was fun. So, running regattas, I started back in 1959. The Pan American Games were run on the lakefront, including sailing stuff, and I worked crash boats for that. That was where I got my start in sort of regatta management along the way. And then sailing with Wally Stenhouse, who is our number 1 Old Guard member, on Aura in the 1968 transatlantic race from Bermuda to Travemünde, Germany. There were 28 boats. We lost control of our rudder 1,800 miles from the finish line, 500 miles west of Ireland. We rigged a jury rig rudder and finished second. That was really something. And then, if you want to top that, working with Gary Jobson and most of all Buddy Melgus for Chicago Yacht Club's Heart of America America's Cup Challenge in 1982, 3, 4 was just another thrill. So lots of experiences that just made a wonderful lifetime of doing that. Well, in 1974-75, I chaired the committee. I got my arm twisted to chair the committee to write the history of the first 100 years of the yacht club. So we named it the first 100 years. Not very creative, but it was great fun working with a bunch of other members to write and find what history we could in that first 100 years. And little did I have any thought that 50 years later, I'd be sitting here talking about the 150th.